Thank you. I told Mark that I have to step out between 5:04 and 4:35. But, and I'm sorry I missed the first meeting. I've had some issues, but in any event,
Well,
I'm here.
It's great to have you here. We've got Jerry Mishaw here, like all sorts of luminaries today. That's terrific.
It's always nice to be with this group, which is, oh, there's Jeff Lubbers, which is filled with luminaries.
Yes. I didn't mean to suggest anyone that there weren't other luminaries. And we have budding luminaries like Emily too. So anyway, Kevin, I'm sorry, I'm hijacking your meeting. I apologize.
But you're really doing that, hijacking my attendance, my roll call for the meeting. So let's start with that. That's all right. I'm just going to go down the list. If and when you hear your name, please unmute yourself and say here, present, whatever. Just to let us ensure, among other things, that your microphone's working. So with that, we're going to do two roles. First, the committee members, Carrie Polynesia, Jenny Jones is an alternate for Jim Anderson. Jenny,
yes. Sorry. Yes.
Great.
Sorry, Mark.
Not a problem at all. Gary Bass said he will not be here. Emily Bremer.
Here.
Alana Cohen. Nope. Peter Constantine.
Good afternoon, here. Thanks.
Peter. Stephen Crowley. Turkey Dobler. Okay. Sarah Beardsley, alternate for Elizabeth Dickinson.
Yes, here. Hi.
Thanks, Sarah. Neil Eisner.
Here.
Andrew Emery.
Here.
Andrew. Cynthia Farina has said she will not be here. Michael Kurtz.
Here.
Thanks, Michael. Dick Kipler. Sally Katzen.
Here.
Thanks, Joe. Katya Kuto.
Here.
Katya. Daniel Liebman. Not be here. William Lauer will not be here. Jerry Mishaw.
Yes.
Randy May. Not joining us. Nita Mendelson will not be joining us. Rebecca Orban will not be joining us. Carrillo. Richard Pierce.
Here.
Hi, Richard. Mitch Play. Mitch may be joining us later. David Pritzker.
Here.
David. Lisa White. Roseborough. Bertrand Ross, I think, is going to join late. Bertrand, are you here? All right, we'll be joining late. Helen Serrazio.
I'm here. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. Anna Shavers.
Here.
Thanks, Anna. Lon Smith. Okay. Kevin Stack.
Here.
Robert Stone.
Here.
Thank you. Tom Sussman. Okay. Miriam Benson. She said maybe joining late. And Adam White.
I'm here.
Thanks, Adam. And then second role will be for ACUS affiliate members and affiliates who are not committee members. Just going down the list. Forrest Bernstein. Amy Bunk.
Here.
Betsy Cole. Okay.
Here.
David
I'm here,
Rosker.
sorry. Yep.
Oh, thanks,
Sorry.
Betsy. Not a problem at all. David Rosker.
Here.
Thanks. And Bill Funk, who I believe just sent me an email saying he needs the link. So I will send him the link. Kevin, I think that concludes roll. Over to you.
Great. Mark, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. First, let me just turn it over to Matt Weiner, our acting chair, Vice Chair and Executive Director of ACUS, and to see if he has any opening remarks for us.
I have no opening remarks. I know you'd like to finish this today, Kevin, and I don't want to be to blame if you don't finish today. So I'd just like to thank you and Mark and Jesse for your hard and excellent work since the last committee meeting and getting the preamble done and so forth and so on.
Thanks so much, Matt. I first want to start by thanking everyone for attending and for participating today. Looking forward to the conversation. The last session we made good progress working through the substantive recommendations. In between the two meetings, we received a comment, and I think it makes sense to entertain the comment right at the beginning of our discussion. So the comment was submitted by Adam Finkel, and asked that we consider either expanding the recommendation or otherwise handling a set of other issues raised by the Congressional Review Act, including amending the CRA to allow Congress to only sever only the portion of the final rule that it disapproves of, so it doesn't kind of have a broader preemptive scope there, to require or encourage Congress to offer a statement of its rationale for its statement of disapproval, and to allow agencies the opportunity to explain themselves during deliberations over a resolution of disapproval. So I think that many of these are really interesting suggestions. I can see that they would be worthy of more consideration by ACUS. I think they are, as Mr. Finkel noted, beyond the scope of the request for proposals for this project. This project was specified, the request for proposals, phasing out, consideration of phasing out requirements that agencies submit paper copies in favor of electronic submissions, making it easier for certain dates and time periods that initiate the CRA review process for agency rules, and formalizing a procedure by which Congress can initiate CRA review of rules that agencies conclude and that are not covered by the CRA. And I think our proposals, the recommendations before us, really do address those points. And so I'd like to sort of commend it to the chair to take up and consider Mr. Finkel's suggestions, because I think that they're the kinds of things that are worthy of consideration before this body. It would be an interesting dialogue. I think he's got some really interesting points to raise. It'd be interesting to see them worked out. So that's sort of my initial thought, is to acknowledge those comments, but I think that they are beyond the scope of the request for proposals that was initiated here. We just pause and see if there's any comments on that. And I'm sorry, I also neglected to, I was eager, sorry, Sally, I see you have a comment, and I was eager, I neglected to read our standard instructions about how to deal with Zoom. So let me just take that occasion now to do that, and then I'll return to my questions for comments. So please note that only ACUS members, including government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternatives, have full speaking privileges. To avoid background noise, though, I'd ask you to keep your microphone on mute and either use the Zoom hand raise feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself then. Please remute yourself when you're done speaking. I'd ask ACUS members and their designated alternatives to use the webcam to facilitate conversation. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and their alternatives, participation requires unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I'll consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points, and we'll presume that the committee members consent absent their raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using Zoom's hand raise function, and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself, and please remute yourself after you're done speaking. For all participants, please use the chat feature only to indicate that you'd like to speak, or for committee members and their attendees when asked to vote. Please do not hold any sidebar conversations or put substantive comments in the chat feature. Only members of the Rulemaking Committee have a right to vote. Please do not vote unless you're a committee member. And Mark and I have a list of those members in case you're unsure. So sorry, I meant to read that at the very outset. So now let me return to the substantive point, and I think I saw what was maybe an actual hand raise, and I'll treat that as a virtual hand raise by Sally Katzen. But others, since I can't see all the screens, do use the virtual hand raise feature.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to join Adam in his concern for the way the CRA has been used, in particular, the substantially similar language, which has had a strange history and I think would benefit from an ACUS recommendation. I agree with Kevin that it is beyond the scope, and trying to be faithful to process, I would want to therefore simply note my agreement and encourage you to do the follow-up. And while you're at it, I would like to suggest another major issue with the CRA, and that is the definition of rule. As somebody who actually participated in the negotiations for the Clinton administration on CRA, I was absolutely clear that a rule was something that had gone through notice and comment. It would have made no sense to include guidance or anything else that can be changed on a moment's notice by someone in the general counsel's office without any kind of process. As somebody who was involved, I will take full responsibility for either screwing up or being bamboozled, one or the other, but I did not see the reference to rule as 551 rather than what we had expected, which was 553. In any event, if we're going to look at Adam Finkel's suggestion for things that are substantively flaky with the CRA as opposed to the more technical, I would ask that this issue be included as well. What is a rule? But otherwise, I join with those who say, not now, not today, maybe tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sally, for your comment, and good to hear your endorsement of Adam's comment, as well as anyone else who would like to be heard on this issue. Great. So let's, if I can just then speak to the chair and to Mark, kind of conveying that members of the committee would be interested in further ACUS inquiry into the substance of Adam's proposals, plus Sally Katzen's comment about clarifying the scope of what counts as a rule. I think that would be terrific.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wouldn't characterize it as members of the committee. I don't know. And Sally's views carry a lot of weight, but Sally is a singular, not a plural. And yes, indeed, on the strength, among other things, of Sally's suggestion, we will seriously consider this, and we will do so soon. And I, for my part, I am aware of Sally's position and the debate that has gone on as to what a rule is for purposes of the CRA. So yes, acknowledged, and we will proceed with looking into this. And we certainly welcome the perspectives and views of any of the committee members who might want to share them with us after the meeting. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Sally.
Thanks so much. So I think maybe now it's appropriate to turn back to, and if I can ask Mark to queue up the substantive recommendations, and we'll return to recommendations. We're in the midst of recommendation 6, and we hadn't yet moved on and approved of that. Let me see if I can just get my screen so it works here nicely. So I can see the chat function as well. Okay, terrific, thank you. And so as I can only see a small portion of those participating, make sure you use the raise hand functions if you'd like to speak, because I can only see a really small subsection in terms of the Zoom feature. So we're on, if you can advance, Mark, to recommendation 6. I think that's where we kind of left off here. There was also, I guess there's one other matter, Mark, that we had talked about with Jesse, which was in recommendation 5, which is, I think there was an oversight or something slipped through the cracks in the drafting here. And the report had included a third category in this context. So Mark's going to work on that, the language that was included there. Do you need a minute, Mark, or?
Sorry, Jesse, if it might be more appropriate if you suggest language here. Sorry for not having any handy at the moment, but.
Yeah, let me turn to our, in the first meeting, I acknowledge, and all those who were with us in the first meeting, the really excellent work in this very technical area by Jesse Cross, who was the consultant. So really thankful to Jesse. And so we were, and Jesse, did you have language in mind? It was by a set of specific dates, something along these lines. Is that right, Jesse?
Yeah, and for context, the report had mentioned 3 possible ways of simplifying the introduction window, and it had mentioned first the possibility you could just eliminate that window entirely. That was the A option there, which we talked through kind of the front end and back end implications of that. Folks may remember last time. Where you would then, it would really just be the Senate action period that does the work of kind of putting a time constraint on the CRA mechanism. A second option would be that we already had here also, that was the B and now been made the C, and you might want to keep that as the B. Maybe if you want to track the report order, it's up to you. But and the idea there was, if you do want to keep an introduction window, one option would be just to formally, fully align it with the Senate action window, because then you would just have one calculation for both of those things. And so that would also simplify. It would just, either of those would remove the need for an independent calculation for introduction window and therefore simplify. The report mentioned also a third option, which was to align the start of the window potentially with the Senate action window, and then just have it extend for a fixed number of calendar days from there. Remember, right now it goes calendar days accepting adjournments of 3 days or more. And so you would essentially be eliminating that piece and just sort of saying, we are actually going to begin it where the parliamentarian has been in practice, which is aligned with the Senate action window, which means you would also need publication in the Federal Register, which again is what's been happening in the real world, but it's not what the statute says. And then from there, you would extend it a fixed number of calendar days. Let's see. So if you wanted to wordsmith that, you would maybe say, align the date on which the period commences with the period during which the Senate may, I don't know, you can maybe say so act, because you already say may act, yada, yada, and B. Provide that such period ends a fixed number of calendar days from such commencement. Something like that, maybe. So that would be just if you did want to sort of fold into the formal recommendations, the three proposals in the report. I obviously defer to you all on whether you want to do that, but I think my sense was the intent was to do that. And so if you did want to, that would be a way to do it.
So let's see if there's any comments on that while people have a little moment to let it sink in here. Any thoughts on that? Let's then let's leave the possibility of coming back to this because it's sort of a little bit of a late entry and people were not allowed to absorb it. But let's kind of leave it there for now. And if people want to come back to it, you can say so, but I don't want to necessarily. So why don't we leave it in track changes for a little while longer, Mark, and then move on to 6, which is where we left off. And if other people have a chance to think more about what's now 5C, we can come back to that. So here we had gotten pretty far along in our conversation of this and made some amendments. So Congress should review and, where appropriate, enact parliamentary interpretations that bear on calculating deadlines under the CRA, either as statutory law or as formal rules of the houses. If Congress does not enact those interpretations as statutory law, it should ensure that they are published in a manner that is accessible to the public. Any comments on this urging of publicity? I see Michael Hertz. Nice to see you, Michael.
Hey, nothing major fundamental, but I tripped over the reference to statutory law or formal rules in the first sentence, and then the second sentence is just the initial clause is limited to statutory law. And I don't know whether that means if they do publish as formal rules, those are deemed accessible to the public, or do we want them to make them accessible? Right, you see my problem here. In other words, my instinct would be we want them to do either A or B, and if they don't do A or B, they should at least do C. That would be the sensible thing. And if that's what it means, then maybe we just say if Congress does not do so, it should ensure that, or something like that.
I can see that. So one way of, so as you were suggesting, if Congress does not do so, would be the edit. It should ensure they're published. So that would be to strike that language there. Let me ask, I can see the logic to that, but we have got a lot of others on the call have a thought on that. Yeah, I see Bill Funk's hand.
Well, I didn't see any problem with the way it was before, because as I understood it, if they adopted it as statutory law, it would automatically be accessible to the public. But if they adopted it as a formal rule of the House, then it wouldn't automatically be published in a manner accessible to the public. And that's what the second sentence was supposed to be saying. So that's, it seemed to me make entire sense. We're saying you should do either statutory law or formal rules. If you choose formal rules, then at least you should publish them in a manner that's accessible to the public. Is that not right, Jesse? Isn't that what you had in mind?
I think, I don't remember those, I think those phrases were added in our last meeting, but and I don't remember the sort of context there, but yeah, I think you both put your finger on the question, which is whether you consider inclusion in the chamber rules to be sufficient kind of giving of publicity to them, right? I mean, I think the ones that where they really clearly fall into a black hole is when you're relying on informal interpretations of the chambers And so those, I think, are the ones that very obviously you're trying to reach here, whether you view inclusion in the chamber rules as sufficient to kind of put people on notice of these. That I think it is the question, especially, I think that question is most heightened for ones where the interpretation is at odds with the statutory text itself. I think that's probably what we were grappling with last time with this, is when the face of the statute seems to say A, even if you publish in the rule under B, is that good enough? But the where appropriate phrase maybe gives Congress enough of a nod there to say, look, try to make the way this all fits together actually visible to outsiders. So in terms of how you view that sort of situation of publication, I think is up to you all, but that's how I would think about the choices here.
Just to interject one comment, make sure, maybe back to Michael and Bill and others, by shortening the sentence as we have with Michael, it sort of allows the possibility that it would ensure they were published in a manner accessible to the public outside of those rules. I don't know if that was what the forum for that would be, a report or something. I don't know exactly. So let me see here. I don't know, we could have different views about the level of publicity of formal rules of the houses, as well as whether we want to invite Congress to publish them in another accessible forum. Bill?
Well, I really like to hear from Michael in terms of, it seems to me that if it's the interpretations of parliamentarian, nobody knows about them. They should be made accessible to the public. If they're formal rules of the House, I suppose somehow those are accessible to the public, but I'll be damned if I know how you do it. Is that my fault that I don't know the way that you see the formal rules of the House?
You can find them easily enough on Google, but they're not accessible in that they're really, really long, dense, complicated, and confusing.
Well, okay, then I would suggest that we go back to the original formulation before you made your change, because if it's in statutory law, then that's obvious. That'll be accessible to the public. But if it's either done through formal rule or through, they don't do either of those things and they just do parliamentarian interpretations, then they should be published in a manner accessible to the public. So I'd say if Congress does not enact those interpretations into statutory law, it should ensure that they are published in a manner that's accessible to the public. Meaning that if they publish them as formal rules,
the implication is that the implication, but not the clear statement, is that publishing them as formal rules of the House is not a manner that is accessible to the public. And so my primary concern was that we all agreed on that implication, and it sounds like we do, and that's fine. It could be clearer, right? But it may be unnecessary. Clearer would be it should ensure they are published in a manner that's accessible to the public, even if they are included in the rules of the houses or something like that. But I agree that the best reading of the current language is exactly as Bill described it. And as long as that's intentionally what we mean to do, I can live with this.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I think it's been a useful dialogue and helped to expose the implied meaning maybe that we hadn't been thinking about. So thanks, Michael. So with that, then, any further comments on recommendation 6? Okay, sounds good. So let's treat those track changes as accepted and move on to recommendation 7. So in my enthusiasm, I read aloud the last recommendation. I don't know that that's particularly helpful. So why don't we just look at this first paragraph and just give a moment to read it to ourselves, and then well, let's just take a moment to read over and refresh on recommendation 7, and I'll ask for whether we have comments on it. Committee. I see Jeff Lovers has his hand up, and I see, Jeff, that you had something to say about recommendation 4. Is that what you'd like to talk about now? No. Okay.
7.
I'll come back to you on 4, but let's talk about 7 now. Great.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have some edits here because I noticed there's some what I would consider imprecision in the way this is written. Because, well, just to take the first point on line 135, it talks about the review of agency actions. Now, the CRA does not involve review of agency actions; it involves review of agency rules. So I have a series of edits that would small, but I mean, if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you what they are. So instead of actions, I would put rules there. And then on the next line, it's not that we're not worried about actions for which agencies do not submit reports, that we're worried about rules for which agencies have not submitted reports. So I would say, instead of do, I would say have, and then make it submitted 801A reports. And then in the next on line, 2 lines down, instead of saying CRA review of such agency actions, I would say in such situations. And then I have a few little edits, minor edits on A, B, and C, and D as well. In A, I would say, I mean, it implies, the way it's written now, that a member or committee will, always request an opinion of the GAO. So I would say a member or committee may request the opinion of GAO. And then in B, I would say GAO responds by issuing an opinion. And then in C, again, I would say a member of Congress or a committee may provide for publication, because there might be situations where after they get the GAO opinion, they don't want it published. And then in D, I would just substitute rule for action at the end. So I hope, I mean, this is a friendly amendment. I'm just trying to make it a little more precise.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. That's really helpful. I think we can, I think that the rule and action, any possible objection to that? Hearing none.
I'll say a quick word on that, which is not an objection, but just to give you context, so you can see the choice that we're making there. I think the initial thought with not characterizing that as a rule was that it becomes a little circular insofar as the thing you're asking GAO to weigh in on to kick this process off is this thing a rule or not? And so if GAO says, no, it is not, then the process is dead, and that's the end of it. Because so there's a worry that by using the word rule there, you're assuming the answer to the question that you're asking for clarification on. And so we were looking for a word to describe. I understand if there's discomfort with action there, but just so you see what the thinking was that you want some word that is broader universe here, where some subset are going to be deemed rules and some subset are going to not be. So that's the thing that we were trying to juggle or dance around there.
I understood that. I mean, I just think that the first sentence is, we're saying that it's a mechanism for initiating review of rules, because if it's not a rule, then we don't need a mechanism for it. for which agencies have not submitted reports. And then I think the rest of the recommendation makes clear that this process is designed to weed out the non-rules, the other actions. So I think clear enough what we're trying to do in the rest of the recommendation, but I think if we leave the first sentence the way it was drafted, I think it would be a little misleading because some readers might think that, oh, the CRA can be used for reviewing all sorts of actions.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I think it's two different ways of reading that lead in, or reading what are we initiating review of? Is it really because we're trying to winnow down to the rules, and then that's the process. So I think either one is fine. Yeah, that was the trade-offs, but I see you're reading there, and I think it makes sense as well.
So let me just maybe take this one by one. So that's helpful background here. So for the Lubbers amendments that are in lines 135 and 136, which is principally actions to rules, and then changing this here, any objections to those? Okay. And then clarifying the language in such situation, replacing of such agency actions to review in such situations. Any objections to that? A member or the committee may request, to adding this may. Okay. Line 140, GOA responds by issuing. Seems like sure stylistic. Any objections there? Okay. And then down to line 143, a member of Congress may provide for the publication. Okay, and then the last one.
We're assuming it's a rule in that case.
In that case, yeah. Any objections there? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff and Jesse, for that larger context. Appreciate that. There's always something under the turtle. Any other comments on paragraph 7? All right, Jeff. I have a comment. I'm sorry. I see Sarah Beardsley. I'd like to recognize you. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks. I had kind of a broader question to ask about this recommendation, which is, and we talked about this at the last meeting, that sort of the focus here is on kind of technical edits to the CRA to sort of effectuate Congress's intent, or to better effectuate its intent. And this recommendation strikes me as, I guess I wanted to raise the question about whether this sort of falls within the four corners of that. Because to me, I completely recognize the sort of gap that's been identified, and the fact that it may, to not have sort of a mechanism here, seems to undermine Congress's purposes in sort of enacting the CRA. I guess my question is, this sort of process that we've identified, which is the current process, that feels to me like it could be more of a substantive decision, that we may not have considered sort of like the different pros and cons of this particular process. Like for example, something that occurs to me is that recognizing that GAO is a neutral arbiter and that's the practice. This process doesn't involve, for example, sort of agency participation in explaining why it may have viewed something as not falling in within the definition of a rule, which may or may not be appropriate to include. The only reason I flag is to say, like, I do think this strikes me as a little bit more substantive in sort of, ACUS's view of what the right process is. And I just flag the question of whether this sort of is just sort of technical, or whether this goes beyond and is sort of taking a more substantive position on what sort of the right process is for congressional initiation of CRA review.
Thanks so much. I see Adam White also has his hand raised.
Thanks, Kevin. I had sort of a similar reaction to this. I was struck by how we zeroed in on this, and I've been thinking it through, and I really do agree with Sarah's point. I'd maybe go a little bit further with a comment I was going to raise later, but as we think through what this mechanism ought to look like, I've been surprised that the recommendations in general don't have either a direct recommendation or a fallback recommendation in terms of the agency's own views, and whether we're proposing a framework that would specifically invite the agency's views, or if we were proposing that the agencies themselves, maybe even in the absence of legislation, adopt procedures to sort of highlight their own views in this, why they are or are not submitting a review. I think that would be a great addition to this. And I'm not sure if that really fits best with 7 or more generally, but I just want to second Sarah's view, as I understood it, that we seem to be really endorsing a process without thinking about how the agency's own views would fit into this, and how we might highlight and elevate those, and really encourage the agencies themselves to come forward with these views.
Thanks so much, Adam. Do others want to jump in on this set of points? I guess, yeah, Bill?
Well, I didn't think it was ACUS making a judgment here. It was because these are technical. Really what we're trying to do is make public and put in, in some sort of formal form what's actually taking place in the real world. And so that's what this particular recommendation does. It doesn't indicate any judgment on our part. It's a question of just trying to make clear what's actually happening and formalizing it rather than endorsing it. If, however, one wanted to include something about getting the agency's comments, I think the place would be to make it as a new C after B, or as a subpart of B, that would say that GAO should inquire of the agency why it didn't make a report. That I think would be a way to put it in. And I don't know if GAO does that now. It may, I don't know. If it did, then that would be just formalizing what's already being done. But other than that, I think it's not really ACUS making a judgment when it puts up what we have proposed here.
I see both Sally and I'm gonna have not met you before, but I'm gonna, if that's okay, call you by your first name. So Sally and then Amit. I can't hear you yet, Sally.
Sorry. When Sarah was starting, I was wondering whether this did cross the line between the technical amendments and what Adam Finkel had been talking about and I had been talking about, which were substantive changes. And then when Adam White added in opportunity for the agency to respond, it seemed to me that it was over the line from the very technical to the substantive, but desirable. I agree, the agency should be heard from, but I think that is crossing the line. And so if ACUS is prepared to look at Adam Finkel's suggestion and my suggestion, I throw this one in the hopper as well, giving the agency an opportunity to participate in this process other than hand carrying up 12 copies of its rules and dumping them in somebody's desk.
Thanks so much. Let me just add, this is just as a way of information, that in the description, the request for proposals, it does have a bullet point 3, which says, formalizing a procedure by which members of Congress can initiate CRA review of rules that agencies conclude are not covered by the CRA. So I think that in a way, there's this looks like it's responsive to the request for proposals. I'm not taking a position on whether it's more or less substantive. And then, so let me just throw that out there. I know that Amit Narang is not a member of APHIS, but I'd be happy to recognize him, hearing no objections. Amit?
May I just jump in real quickly, Kevin?
Sure.
And I just, if I can just turn to Reeve. Kevin is referring to bullet points in an Reeve in an RFP. Are those bullet points? Those are the bullet points that we use to solicit a consultant and identify sort of the scope of the research. Is that a document coextensive with the project description, which is a more authoritative statement of what was approved by the council? I don't know the answer. I'm just asking the question because I did hear Kevin refer to the RFP.
Thank you.
Certainly, yeah. So my understanding is yes. In fact, I can even read off, I guess, on the website what it specifically says on the project description. And so item 3 that we're referring to refers to formalizing a procedure by which members of Congress can initiate congressional review of rules that agencies conclude are not covered by the CRA.
Thanks, Reeve, and thanks, Matt, for that intervention. So let me now turn to Amit.
Thank you, Kevin, and I appreciate ACUS giving me an opportunity to share my views, even though I'm not a committee member nor a public member. Let me first say that I do have quite a bit of familiarity with these GAO opinions. I think I've read many, if not all of them, just as a factual point, in every opinion that I have read, GAO has actively sought out the opinions of the agency issuing the, let's call it the action, potentially a rule if GAO deems it such. So it does appear to be within the ad hoc GAO process that has arisen under the CRA. That said, I do fully associate myself with Sarah, Sally, and Adam's view that this goes beyond a technical fix of the statute and is a substantive fix, in my opinion, that essentially writes in to the statute a solution to a problem that has been recognized in oversight, if you can call it that, within the CRA, that has clearly become problematic over the years in terms of what is and isn't a rule. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. I see Jeff Lovers has his hand up. Jeff, we can't hear you yet.
I want to say hi to Ahmet, one of my best former students, but also based on what he said, I think he's saying that it is a part of the process, and what we're trying to do in this recommendation is describe the process. So if that's the case, then apart from the larger questions of whether this whole number 7, might be too substantive, I think in paragraph B, we could just say GAO issues an opinion in response after soliciting views from the agency or something like that, just to describe what's actually going on here.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I see Jerry Mashaw's hand is up, so nice to have a chance to call on him.
Thanks, Kevin. We might solve the substantive versus technical problem, I think, by simply prefacing 7 by saying, if Congress intends to continue its current practice, it should provide a transparent mechanism.
Terrific. Let me just let people think about that for a moment. Okay, great. That's helpful. Jesse?
Yeah, I just figured I would jump in and add just 1 or 2 points of context. I think everything in the discussions made a lot of sense. Just the 2 points of context I find floating in my head. One is that bear in mind that what all of this triggers, right, is something with respect to a decision about whether something is a rule and of when, specifically for purposes of chamber procedure, right? And so I think we often think with the part of our brain that's in terms of construing something as statutes as opposed to as internal chamber decision making, which is ultimately what this is setting off. So just that may change the extent to which, you know, Congress has comfort folding in outside actors and their views and doing sort of a notice and commenty type thing. May not, but just to have on the radar. And then just, you know, FYI, probably if you struck this whole recommendation, you're probably still recommending the whole thing under number 6, because this really is just a very big instance of formalizing something Congress is already doing and that's not in the language of the statute. So you'd probably, you know, that this one really is just that, but it's sort of consequential enough that it's getting its own discussion here, but it's really just one more iteration of that. So just put that on the radar too.
Thanks, Jesse. Bill Funk?
I just wondered what happened to Jeff Lubber's suggestion for B.
Was it after?
Right, that's it.
Yeah. Good. So just to be clear in our kind of group conversation here, let's look at this language at the beginning of paragraph 7, the Mashaw amendments here as implemented by ACUS. Seems to be clarifying. Any other comments on that clarification? I don't know whether you want to come back to Sarah Beardsley or Sally.
Yeah, I think I do appreciate that change in B. To me, what struck me about this recommendation is, you know, it's one thing for ACUS to sort of support the current practice. I guess because this recommendation talks about codifying it in statute, it moves it, I guess, to something. It's advocating a level of formality that I think that I found significant. That it would be one thing to say, like, you know, ACUS recommends, you know, a practice along these lines. It's nothing to say, and you know, now this is because I do think putting something like this in statute then, you know, sort of consistent with the point that Sally made at the outset, that there are some questions about the scope of a rule. And so once you create a process that that lends itself to questions about what, you know, when initiation is appropriate, I think it can tee up some of those questions. So just to give a little context for why, for where some of that my comment is coming from.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. I think this recommendation is meant, does, if it were to be adopted, you know, would make it more transparent as to the process, but it does move the needle a little bit. Did anyone else want to jump in on it? So maybe I should hold a I see there's a, just 1 second. Okay, yeah, so let me just first, I think it probably is appropriate to take a vote on the amendments that are, let's call them the Mashaw amendments to paragraph 7. And then we'll, at the end of these more specific amendments, we'll talk about the recommendation as a whole. So I think let's try a voice vote. All committee members in favor of the amendment say aye.
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 Aye. All committee members who oppose the amendment say nay. Okay, so let's treat that language as adopted. And then I'm reminded that is there someone who would like, a committee member who would like to move the amendment to line 141, which is after soliciting views from the agency? That was Lovers with a little assist from Bill Funk to make sure it was still on our radar.
So moved.
Great, thanks, Michael. Let me just ask, any objections to this inclusion? Great, we'll treat that then as accepted. Let's go ahead. I think it's useful, given the substantive conversation that we've had, to do an overall vote on recommendation 7. So why don't we just do a voice vote again and see how that sounds? So let's do all committee members in favor of recommendation 7 say aye.
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 All committee members opposed to recommendation 7 say nay. Okay, so let's move on. So now we have a choice here. I know that Jeff Lovers has a comment he wants to make on recommendation 4. I think I'd like to kind of charge through if we can and then go back. He said it was a friendly amendment, maybe of a smaller nature. So let's see if we can kind of keep working with going to 8 here. So if Congress amends the CRA to enact the procedure described in paragraph 7, it should impose a time limit on its own use of that procedure. See Jerry Mashaw and then Adam White.
Yeah, Kevin, I just had a question about that. I was unclear whether this was a time limit for completing the procedure or a time limit for actuating the procedure.
Great. I think there's some need for some, we could think about some specification. Adam?
Yeah, my question was, when we say Congress should impose a time limit, are we saying that it should include in its amendment a time limit, or are we saying that it should adopt a further rule imposing a time limit pursuant to the new statute?
Great, thank you. Let me just take those two clustered. Let me see if, can I turn to you, Jesse, to see if you have some comment on the nature of the time limit and how it's imposed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea was, the question is sort of how far back in time can you reach to grab older rules, right? And so it wasn't about the time limit. You know, you already have the action windows and all of these things that set once kind of how long you have in terms of the duration of the action window, for example. This is getting at, can we initiate a process tomorrow to grab a rule from 1998, right? That's the sort of thing, and you'd probably, I would think, peg that to initiation was the idea. But that's the sort of time limit the report discusses that I think this recommendation was trying to capture. In terms of whether to put it in statute or in chamber rulemaking, I believe the thought was in keeping with kind of the recommendation also in number 6, that something like this, where the face of the statute really is, I would say, I don't know if you would say it's flatly misleading. Some parts of it are more misleading, but the fact that this whole process is completely substatutory feels like, yeah, I would say it's borderline misleading at this point. And so I would, the thought was statutory text would be the place for something like this, because it really is part of the core statutory mechanism at this point. So that was the thought. I certainly would defer. You could argue that it should be substatutory as well, but it strikes me as, it's another track to the process that the statute already explicitly lays out. And when you've got 2 roads and the statute only discusses one, you create the real risk of it misleading.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Maybe excuse I kind of got 2 comments going simultaneously. So let me see if we can deal with them one at a time, and may come back to Jesse. So first comment is Jeremy Shaw's, which is about the nature. So it should impose a time limit on its own, I guess, initiation of that procedure, and time limit is maybe a little if others have an idea, there's something about the time limit that strikes me as maybe a little awkward here, or not quite the right. It should pose a
statute of limitations.
Yeah, a statute,
quote unquote.
Yeah, right.
It's maybe like a statute of limitations on the availability of CRA rules for review under such process, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if statute of limitations is used in that sense, but yeah, that's the idea. So you had nice language there. Statute of limitations for review, was that?
Or like on the, maybe, I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but like on the availability of rules for review under such process, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure we do actually call it a process somewhere above, so that has an antecedent.
Yeah, procedure in the prior sense. So impose a
eligibility.
Oh yeah.
Limitation on the eligibility of rules for review. I think that I don't know if statute of limitations are used in that way, but I think that's certainly the idea. Others have any other drafting suggestions on that before we think about impose a statute of limitations on the eligibility of rules for review under such procedure. Let me ask if there's any comments about that amendment.
I want to put statute of limitations in quotes.
Quotation.
Say, alternatively, I was trying to think of ways around to identify a time after which identify, then there's lots of cross references that are needed. Okay, any further comments on this one? Okay, any objections? Okay, thanks for the clarification from Jeremy Shaw that got us going on this. Now let's pick up Adam White's point, which is about whether this should be in statutory or substatutory law. So I see both Bill Funk and Adam. Bill looks like he's up first. So Bill.
Well, I would suggest that it be treated the same as what we did in 7. In fact, what I would suggest is we take this and put it as part of 7, make it either a new A or a E afterwards. I mean, it just seems to me if you don't need to say if you do what you do in 7, then do this. You say in 7, this is what you should do. If you don't do it, okay. But it seems to me it goes along with it. And I think the time limit by which to do it is important to be put in laws as anything. So I'd say it should be statutory and it should be part of 7.
Okay. Let me see. Adam.
Thanks, Kevin. I was just going to say, honestly, I think the way we phrased the last amendment solves the question that I had. I mean, we're saying right here, it is a statute of limitations. And so I think it sort of renders my question moot. I like the way it's phrased.
Okay. Let me just turn to our consultant, Jesse, and then I'll pick up the comment from Michael. And with the suggestion, not losing Bill Funk's suggestion that this could be possibly incorporated along with the next one as an E and an F of the same recommendation. So Jesse?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that if you do want to fold it into 7, you're probably going to want to tweak the lead-in language to 7 also, where we refer to the process it currently relies on to initiate, because that is probably the distinction between 7 and 8, is that 7 is a process that currently exists. 8 is something that isn't, that is sort of just a new policy recommended because it seems logical, but it's not part of that current process anymore. So that's the thought of keeping it in a separate, is that what 7 outlines is all already happening, whereas 8 is not.
Thanks, Jesse. That's helpful. I see. Michael, did you take your hand down?
Jesse said what I was going to say.
Okay, thanks.
And I received, after hearing that, I received my suggestion that it be put into 7.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So any further comments on recommendation 8? Okay, anyone who objects to adopting recommendation 8? I guess we've sort of, good. So I'm mindful that we'll take a break, in a bit, but I think we can just go a little bit further. Maybe we'll take a break at 25 after, if that works. We'll see how these next couple recommendations go. So recommendation 9, if Congress amends the CRA to enact the procedure described in paragraph 7, it should permit legislatures in both chambers to solicit a GAO opinion on whether a particular agency rule action is a rule. Jeff Lubbers.
My only thought is that the reader might not understand why this is being recommended. And I mean, is it because at this point only members of the Senate can do this, or only members of the House can do this? And if so, we should maybe give a hint as to why we're saying what we're saying here. So maybe.
Yeah, I can.
It's in Jeff's report, I'm sure, but I just can't remember.
Yeah, no, I can jump in and provide some context there. It is not currently limited in its availability. What this was referring to is there was a point in the report where I just sort of talked through the question of, one can imagine an argument that maybe because what this process really triggers that's meaningful is all on the Senate side. You can imagine an argument that maybe it should just be available to the Senate. And so the report just sort of talks through the idea that notwithstanding the fact that the primary procedural benefits are in the Senate, there are a lot of non-procedural benefits to being able to initiate this process, just sort of signaling benefits, things like that are valuable to Congress. And so because of that, it makes sense to continue it as something that's available to the House as well as the Senate. Whether you need to say that in a separate bullet point, I think is up to you all, but that is the idea this was coming from.
And so in that case, then I think I would say continue to permit. But
any comments on continue to permit? Bill, is your comment about that?
Well, it's on this section. I mean, Mike, I had much the same question that Jeff had, which is why do we need this after you have A in 7 that says a member requests the opinion of GAO? It seems if they're going to enact that into statute, that the member requests opinion of GAO, it just seems to me that you don't need something, you don't need 9. And if so, I'm not sure why.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bill. Michael Hertz.
I'm with Bill on that, but it might clarify it if we change A to any back in 7. Any in 139 and in 143, both.
And then along with that would be striking or?
Yeah, right. And then get rid of 9. I mean, as Bill said, this makes the point that 9 makes.
Okay. So should we move to strike? So let's see what, so any objections to striking 9? Okay, thanks, Jeff, Bill, and Michael for those changes. Let's now turn to what is now new recommendation number 9. Congress should consider imposing a deadline on GAO for issuing requested opinions on whether a particular agency action is a rule for the purposes of the CRA. Any comments on Congress imposing deadlines on GAO? Yeah, Adam?
Sorry about that. Thanks, Kevin. Looking at this one, I wonder if this seems like a good example of sort of the common caveat we include in our recommendations on agency resources. Obviously, I don't know how you necessarily write that into a statute, but a little wary of sort of putting a mandatory duty on GAO without any kind of caveat or pressure release valve for resource constraints. And so I just wanted to flag that concern. I don't know how I would translate that into text, and maybe GAO presents different circumstances than other agencies, but given how often we note that concern, I think it's worth considering here too.
Thanks so much, Adam. Yeah, it would be a deadline, irrespective of what other deadlines they may face, so impede their discretion a bit. Anyone else want to jump in on this? I don't know, maybe Jesse, do you want to speak to the motivation for including some kind of deadline on the GAO?
Yeah, I think the context was that when you talk to folks in Congress about this, there's not a tremendous amount of frustration, but you'll hear it come up sometimes that the response time from GAO has varied, in its timeliness. And, I think just by putting this in statute, I mentioned in the report, you probably solve that problem partly just because now GAO views it as higher in their sort of hierarchy of things they need to get to if they prioritize statutory mandates. So even that would help there, but there's it was mentioned in some of the interviews that maybe putting a deadline on that as well would be just another extra kind of kick in the butt, to use a legal term of art, to get them to do that. And to Adam's point, the report provides some context. It mentioned that also the possibility that Congress may want to pair this with some more resources too, and if it is necessary. And I think you can see this one just sort of says should consider imposing, as opposed to some of the others that don't have that kind of wiggle room in there. I think that was a nod toward some of the things that Adam is talking through.
Yeah, Jeff Lovers.
I think this is one that I would omit if it were up to me. I think Congress has enough leverage over the GAO as it is to move things along. And I don't think we need, there's also a history of Congress trying to put statutory deadlines on agencies where it doesn't really work out very well. So I just think if I were on the committee, I would move to strike this one.
I see Bill and also Emily. Let me turn to them in that order. Bill Funk.
Well, Congress has a lot of leverage over GAO. Remember, this can be triggered by any member. And that's both a problem and something else. That is, if any member can do it, well, boy, maybe lots of members are going to do it, but but we're only talking about the situation where somebody's claiming something's a rule where where the agency hasn't sent it up. So I think it's a limited set. But I mean, it's an individual member doesn't have a lot of leverage with respect to GAO. And so I think in terms of time limits, as you say, time limits for agencies routinely get violated. So, I mean, so could GAO routinely violate the deadline, but the deadline would at least be something to give them an idea that this is something they should take seriously and try to do within that time period. So I don't think it's harmful, but I don't think it's that important.
Thanks, Bill. So we turn now to Emily Bremer.
I'll just note that ACUS historically has recommended against congressional deadlines, sort of in keeping with what Jeff was saying. I don't know that I feel overly strong about it. Maybe this is a place where some, we could trot out the should consider language as a possible compromise.
I mean, it could be even, it says should consider. I think
oh, well, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at the faces and not at the text. So.
Yeah. I guess we don't do might consider, so it's too low.
Well, let's not expand our options in that direction.
So do others want to jump in, or maybe circle back to Adam? I don't know whether should consider in a lot of these comments and bills, or how are you feeling about that?
Kevin, if I may, if the concern here is GAO resources, and the concern may be other things, you could say, subject to consideration of GAOs, whatever, Congress should. I mean, if you don't want to use the word should consider twice, I mean, that would be one option here. If the concern is exclusively resource constraints on GAOs.
Or you could maybe subject to consideration of GAO's research constraints, Congress should evaluate. Or,
Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do. I'm just trying to avoid should consider. I'm trying to avoid like should consider upon consideration of resource constraints. I'm just trying to avoid the redundant words.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So then I see Adam White and then Emily Byrne.
Thanks, Kevin. Honestly, having raised the issue, I think the points that people offered in response sounded perfectly reasonable to me, and the should, the original language of should consider probably does answer my concern. And so I having opened this box, I'm perfectly happy for us to close it. I think we're probably okay.
Emily Bremer. Good. Okay. Thanks, Adam. So let me just see if there's anyone else who wants to raise any issues with recommendation 9? So hearing none, let me just see if there's any, sorry, Emily?
So can I ask a question? This might be a dumb question, but if I'm just looking at the text of the recommendation, I can't, since it says whether a particular agency action. Well, never mind. I retract. Never mind.
Okay. Thanks. So let me see if there's any any objections to recommendation 9. Okay. I'm mindful it's about time for a break. I know, Jeff, you have a very, Jeff Lovers had a, and it would be good, nice, kind of logical to take a break after the recommendations and before the preamble. Let me see, on what was the nature of your amendment to paragraph 4?
So when it's 4, yeah. So when I read 4, as an uninformed reader might read it, it sounds like ACUS is recommending that Congress create some new process for rules that are going to be submitted, blah, blah, blah. That process already exists. So I would just add in a phrase, Congress should amend the statute to simplify it by setting a fixed date. That at least gives some idea of what we're doing, why we're doing this. We want to simplify.
Jesse, let me just see if that, do you see any issues with that?
No, I mean, I would regard that as mainly stylistic. So I think whichever people find to be a more clear expression, I think seems to me to,
Good, thanks. Any objections to adding this language? Yeah, Jeremy Shaw. So we can't quite hear you there.
Sorry. This is not very serious, but I'm not sure what the "it" refers to.
Section 801 D1 should simplify it, or the act, or more generally. Yeah, good.
I was thinking of the statutory provision itself, but maybe
The process or something like that.
simplify the process. It's not necessarily, it's not really the process that's being simplified, it's figuring out, what the situation is every year. Simplify the calculation.
There's a thought by, I think Mark should amend and simplify. The question is whether all the simplifications, is in a one. So amend and simplify.
Amend to simplify. Keep going. By setting a fixed date. To simplify 5 U.S.C. blah 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 by setting a fixed date.
Yeah,
that's what.
Jeff, I think that seems to capture the.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But don't you want to delete amend? Congress should simplify 801D by setting.
Good.
Amend to simplify seems awkward.
Yeah, I see. And then Jeremy Shaw's hand up.
No, sorry, I just didn't take it down.
That's good. Okay, it's fine. So should amend to simplify by setting. Any objections to that?
Well, Michael objected.
Well, I guess should simplify. Sure, but should simplify by setting. this maybe is close to something we could commend to the Committee on Style. I think we're getting close to that. So, but I think it should simplify by setting. I think that covers it. There, Michael, anything else?
Sorry, I know you're trying desperately to take this break. I'm tripping over each year in line 118 since it's really only every other year. You know, it's the second session of each Congress that this is relevant.
But it applies to every session, doesn't it, technically?
It applies to every session, but not every calendar year. I mean, it apply. I mean, in other words, it's the. In other words, there's not a date in 2000. What are we in 2021? There's not a date in 2021 after which there'll be a date in 2022. After which.
I thought there was. Maybe Ahmet knows.
Because there's not a new Congress in 2022. Oh, it's following session. I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. Sorry. Ignore me. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So that's
my understanding is. Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks. Jesse, go ahead.
I think it was Ahmet who was speaking there.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I couldn't see.
Very quickly, my understanding is that the rules carry over from first sessions to second sessions within individual Congresses. So it's not from Congress to Congress, but from session to session, even within one Congress.
Okay. Let me just turn to Jesse to see if you have just to make sure we're square on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. So
okay. So let me see if we can just any further objections to or comments on paragraph 4.
Just one quick comment, Kevin. I take strong issue with Michael calling himself an idiot.
Okay, good. As do I. So maybe on that.
Let's not take a vote on that.
Yeah, that's no, on that. I think it's a good time for us to take a break. So I'll see you at 36 after, and then we can we'll proceed from there. And I see. So see you in a minute. So welcome everyone back to the meeting, and thanks for all the dialogue and amendments on the first session. And so Mark, if you can go ahead and share screen again. There's two items on my tick list from some dialogue in the break. There's some more comments on paragraph 4 initiated by Lon Smith, and then Adam White also has a question on the relationship between 7 and 9. And so let's since we're right in the middle of paragraph 4, right before the break, let's stick with that, and then we'll return to Adam's comment here. So I don't know, maybe this is a chance either. I think this is an email communication between Lon Smith and Mark Thompson. Do you want to put that in the chat and I could read it aloud, or we could maybe Lon, you could speak to. Oh, here we go. It looks like Mark's typing it in now.
Yeah, while he's doing that, let me mention the problem. I think that this was a paragraph that we focused on last time, and I think David Pritzker said it could be read 2 ways. I think the way we drafted it could still be read 2 ways. The way it was, as you can see in the original, it says should simplify by setting a fixed date after which each year we'll submit it to Congress. So the question that 2 ways of reading it, I think the easiest way to see it is an example. One is that the fixed date is November 4th, 2021. And every year for the next 20 years, it's always November 4th, 2021. Okay. The other way of reading it is that it's November 4th, 2021. And then each year it's the next November 4th. So you're always looking to the immediately preceding November 24th. So the question when it says each year, you can't tell what each year applies to. And I think we want it to be the anniversary date that they're fixing, because date, again, can be a single date or it can be a series of anniversary dates. So that was the excuse me, that was the, I think he's just typed in the wording that I had proposed.
Yeah, which is, after a date is fixed, the anniversary of that same date should be used for each of succeeding 12 for each succeeding 12-month period. So I see, I turn to Jesse and see if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, and this is not to weigh in on that's a solution, but just in the name of kind of spitballing, if there's still concern about this, another edit you could make if you wanted more clarity there, and it might be you could, after fixed date, maybe put a parenthetical of in the form of a month and count and day or something like that. You could specify there that you don't the year. Something like that would be just another way to tackle that same problem, just in the name of kind of putting options on the board.
There's also, or would a fixed calendar, I don't know, a fixed calendar day, there's, we run into problem on Saturdays as well, but okay, I don't know, maybe, any comments on that from Lon or others?
Yeah, I'm just, am I still on mute, or can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, when you talk about, in my experience in dealing with tax elections and counting methods, if you talk about day, you're usually talking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. A date can be a month and a day, or it can be a month, a day, and a year. And that's where the confusion comes in. So I think that's why I think Mark agreed that just saying after a date is fixed, the anniversary of that date, it makes it clear that they're going to say the date is November 4th, 2021, and each anniversary date after that. If you try to condense that too much, I'm afraid it's going to get confusing again.
Thanks so much, Lon. I see Michael Hertz has his hand up.
Adding a whole nother sentence seems to me using a sledgehammer to kill an ant here. I like the month and day, but I think we could just do it by setting a month and a fixed month and day, after which each year, blah, blah, blah.
Month and day, I think, was the suggestion.
Yeah, I'm agnostic between day and date, if people think it matters. But then we have a month and a day, and then we know it recurs annually. So.
Better than what we had, but okay.
Other thoughts on this date anniversary issue? Okay, so see whether there's any objections from to the amendment, which is by setting a fixed month and day, after which, and so on. Okay, let's that. So now let me turn to Adam White had a comment that we didn't get to before the break on the relationship between paragraph 7, 8, and 9. So Adam, I don't see you, but I think you're probably there somewhere. So
I'm out here, Kevin. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, thinking through the recommendations, especially after the first session we had days ago, and looking back at the way that we teed this up with the sort of the three-part description of what we're doing here, it just occurred to me that for all of our recommendations for Congress and the GAO, we never actually recommend anything for the agencies themselves. And of course, if Congress itself were to pass the legislation, it would square away a lot of this. But it just seems to me there's still a gap in this process that we've described here between the agency reaching a conclusion that it will or will not submit something to Congress under Section 801, and then in lieu of such a submittal, Congress or GAO sort of stumbling upon this. And so I wonder if we ought not include some sort of recommendation, either in conjunction with the proposed legislation or just a fallback, that just some general recommendation that agencies, again, within the limits of their resources, make available to the public, or published in a manner that's accessible to the public, to borrow the line from recommendation 6, its conclusions regarding not submitting rules to Congress. I mean, if we're already presuming that the agencies are making these conclusions, and if we're trying to solve the delay problem that results when we have this long gap between the agency taking action and Congress doing anything under the CRA, it seems to me we ought to knit those together somehow. And so I would strongly suggest that we consider recommending that the agencies themselves find a way to publish those conclusions in a manner that's accessible to the public. And that, I think, would accelerate the congressional process that we're describing here.
And that would be just so I understand the scope of what you're making, that would be a recommendation, just a recommendation to agencies, not part of the statutory amendment.
That's right. I mean, we could have proposed it as something that's actually in the statute. And I mean, needless to say, I wouldn't be averse to that. But we're already proposing a lot here in legislation. And so I'd be perfectly comfortable in making sort of a much softer recommendation to agencies. One, again, that's limited by sort of agency resources, but, maybe mirrors the language that we use in paragraph 6 on Congress creating more transparency for parliamentarian descriptions. And I just add, considering that in our, what is it now, paragraph 8, I guess, that we're asking Congress to put a time limit on its own processes, that would function much better if we actually encourage the agencies themselves to bring these things up into the sunlight where Congress will see them.
Thanks, Adam. I see Sally Katzen.
Thank you. I guess Adam said a couple of times, subject to resources. I, for one, am loath to place any more burdens than already exist under the CRA on the agencies themselves. In part, that's because of my reaction to the definition of rule, which we're postponing to another day. But GAO has set its guidance. It has all sorts of other things as well. I think we're sending agencies on a task of notifying whomever, whenever, about all of these different things that it does, never sure of what really is a rule and what isn't, but also we're just building on this thing which was designed for a very limited purpose and has gotten completely out of hand. And I think that's more than correcting drafting problems or mechanistic problems, which was our original script for this session, which was just make what's there work. This is making more work for the agencies. I maybe have generated too much opposition. I see a lot of hands going up.
Okay, thanks. I recognize Bill Funk and then Jeff Lovers.
Oh, no, I'm not taking issue with Sally. I want to support what she's saying. And the reason is because the definition in the Congressional Review Act does carve out several things that are rules under the APA, but are not rules for purposes of the Congressional Review Act. And the point is that agencies are doing a lot of things that are rules, but are not rules subject to the Congressional Review Act, so they don't have to be reported to Congress. And if in every one of those situations they had to say, the reason we're not reporting it is because it's exempt under the Congressional Review Act, I mean, it's just, the number of times that there's this big issue about guidance and interpretations. But other than that, there's a whole lot of other rules that don't have to be reported that are exempt under the Congressional Review Act. So I think it's just imposing a lot of work on agencies to put out information that Congress really doesn't need, the public doesn't need. It's not controversial. So I strongly support what Sally says.
Okay, let me just ask for a brief comment from Jeff, and then I have a suggestion.
Well, I support it too, and I just wanted to illustrate it by referring to one of your studies, Kevin, where you talked about preambles to rules that contain guidance documents. So our agency is supposed to go through all their preambles and separately indicate guidance points that are in the preamble and then send those separately to Congress. The problem is that guidance documents, interpretive rules, and policy statements is such a fuzzy category that it contains so many things. And for the reasons that Sally and Bill said, I would also not want to see this codified.
So here's, thanks, Jeff. So here's my suggestion, Adam, is I think that this suggestion is maybe, and Jesse and Mark and others in ACUS, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe something we could recommend to, or at least ask ACUS to consider in its own further consideration of revisions and implementation of the CRA, since there's other things we've already recommended. Would that be, how would that sit?
And you mean you would recommend subjects for further study in the recommendation itself?
No, I was actually making a comment that that we would maybe ask ACUS to consider, or Adam could himself ask ACUS to consider when in further study of the CRA, that they would take up this question about the agency's disclosure obligations and duties relative to rules that are not disclosed to Congress. So not as a recommendation, not in some sense, not as part of this set of recommendations, but as something that ACUS might consider in its further work on the CRA.
I mean, it assumes further work. I mean, I don't. It's fine. I mean, it's. I mean, it's not. Reeve, you know what? I was a little caught off guard here in terms of my attention. Maybe I'm missing what's going on here. Is this a customary thing that we do? I mean, it does happen occasionally.
I also by no means mean to breach any ACUS protocol. I'm new at this, and so I was just thinking of a way of maybe, or we could simply. It sounds like there's objections to. There are some voice objections to Adam's comment. We could also just deal with it right now, if that's cleaner. And then if Adam continues to have a concern, he can raise it again in whatever forum or here. So maybe that's a cleaner way of going. So let me ask, and I'm conscious of the time in part because I do want to turn to the preamble. So maybe Adam was suggesting that we include a recommendation that asked agencies to make available their rules to the public, those rules that they hadn't submitted to Congress. And there was some dialogue about that. I don't know whether it's worth taking a kind of sense of the room about whether it's worth getting to fine detailed drafting, or maybe let's do that, or ask Adam to specify that. I just thinking, let's maybe let me ask, how many are there, other than Adam, are there committee members who would like us to continue to draft such a recommendation now? If so, say aye. Okay, so I think that maybe helps us move forward now, and thanks for the clarification on the procedure. So now I think I'm caught up on our recommendations on the review of the recommendations, but for, if you can go ahead, scroll backwards, I think it's to recommendation 6. I don't know whether we had any further, anyone had devoted any further thought to that. Part C. Any further comments on that? All right, then let's treat that as accepted. And let me just ask, I think it's customary, but I look for advice from my colleagues at ACUS. If I can, should we vote on all the recommendations as a whole and then to the preamble, or what's the normal procedure on that?
And there's no normal procedure, whatever you think is best under the circumstances. That's not a great answer, but maybe not the answer you want to hear, but that is the best answer.
Okay. I think that, I don't, it's kind of formal at this point to vote on as a whole. So let's just go, we voted on them, I think, one by one. So let's go ahead and turn to the preamble here and see if there are, if any of our participants have comments on the preamble, which was, I guess, I think the idea is to stick carefully to the remit and scope of the actual recommendations.
A minor note, I think the on line 13, we're missing an is somewhere in there. Electronic submission currently is not a valid means, right? Yeah, right.
There it is, yeah. Well, I see a couple hands up. Recognize Jeff Lubbers, and then I'll turn to Elizabeth Cole.
These are very minor. On the next page, where you refer to, no, I guess it's the third page, sorry. Next page after that.
Which line are you in?
I'm looking at, maybe I'm looking at page, no, line 94. This is really trivial, but we've already said government accountability GAO, so you just need to say GAO there. And then on the next, on line 96, well, yeah, I think you can say if GAO concludes that it does. And then cross, yeah, to the comma here. That's all.
Thank you. That seemed like nice stylistic edits. Elizabeth Cole.
Back up to the word valid when we talk about means of agency submission. So okay, I know that's what this whole discussion has been about, but I'm cognizant of the fact that there are agencies in the government, the Energy Department being one where I was before I came over to transportation to work with Dan. But and that's the way we've been doing it since the beginning of COVID. And we've, said so sorry to the nasty emails from the House and Senate, but I mean, that's the way we've been doing it. So I don't know whether we could say something like, and we've promised to follow up as soon as possible, right? But I wouldn't want it to be, well, I don't know whether we could say something like that. It's not a method of transmission currently set forth in the statute or something. I don't know, just to recognize the reality that, and I don't think we were the only ones who have been doing it that way since last March or whatever.
Okay, so it would be maybe the amendment would be not electronic is not currently set forth, or I don't know if the language is permitted by the statute
or prescribed. I don't know what word to use. I just don't want it to be as though somehow we're recognizing a violation for something that has been occurring.
Okay.
You could do something like is not generally regarded by Congress as an acceptable means or something like that. I don't know if that helps.
That works because it is there coming back to us and complaining. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Elizabeth. Jeff Lovers. No, that's it. Oh, damn. Let me just see if there's any. It's not generally regarded by Congress as an acceptable means of submitting. Yeah. Any further comment on that? No. Any other comments? Well, I want to leave a suitable period, but I also don't want to. I want to be respectful of people's time for sure, and that it would be certainly, I think, nice to avoid a third meeting, in part because it would conflict with the ABA's fall conference, and other matters to be sure. So I want to just give a little longer since we have a moment now, and then see if there's any other comments on the preamble. Well, I know this is a group of participants that has a lot of careful attention to language, so I think that's a good sign here. Let me just touch a good sign here. So I think maybe we're.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you have another minute.
Sure.
There's a note on line 66, 67 from Matt, I guess.
Not my note.
Oh,
Mark.
Mark.
It's from the ACA staff.
From Mark.
Yeah,
from Mark. I thought, yeah, okay. Yeah. In recent years, the look back period has tended to commence between mid-July and early August. Now, is that true for every session of Congress, or only in those years when it really makes a difference, like, when there's going to be a change in the administration or something like that? And this is kind of a question for Jesse. And Mark's comment is that some members had suggested that maybe we should try to mention here that another possible date might align with our recommendation on midnight rules, which would be a later date. So I don't know if we resolve that issue. So
I can jump in and give some context there. So I think what that was drawing on is there's a part of the report where I give the the averages I focused on over the last decade, because that is basically, especially when the sort of government signing date has sort of stabilized in Congress, and so that seems like a relevant window. And with those, I'm trying to remember. I believe the overall date was the average over the last decade was mid-July, and the sort of presidential transition years, the average was early August. I want to make sure I didn't flip those two, but those were, I specified in the report the actual date, but the range they're giving here captures is referring to the two separate ranges over the last decade of every single one, and also the midnight rule situation you're flagging.
Okay. Well, that satisfies me, but then the next question is, would we also say something like another possible relevant date might be, and then put something in that aligns with our recommendation 2012-2. I'm not sure what we'd say exactly, but 90 days before January 20th, what date is that? It's like October 15th or something. So we didn't really discuss whether that might be a more relevant date than the average date.
And I guess I wonder how much that's, I guess we're just providing information in the preamble here, and how much that's relevant to some of the general recommendations about date setting below, although we don't, talk too much about midnight, the kind of dates relevant to midnight rules here.
How about just making that into a footnote and saying something like, see also ACUS recommendation 2012-2, which discusses this special problem related to midnight rules. And a date could be selected based on that. I mean, some sort of footnote about it.
Okay, which helps to alert Congress of that other possibility.
And also our recommendation.
Yeah, and a recommendation. Did I don't know, Mark, if you got enough of that.
Or one way to do that, if you wanted to, would be just strike the highlighted sentence, and you could even just make that a parenthetical on footnote 5 if you wanted to take that approach and say sort of outlining the dates on which the look back period has commenced over the last decade or something like that, if you want. I mean, that would be a very kind of tight way to do that if you wanted that approach.
The only thing it's sort of, that your report does do that, and a lot else besides, there's a way in which it's, I think, above the line. Your recommendation there, Jesse, or your thought there was cutting the sentence above the line. I think above the line, it gives it some prominence. I think Jeff's simply adding.
I wasn't objecting to that. I was suggesting dropping a footnote about the.
So I guess we already have a footnote. Yeah. So
sorry.
Yeah. So then it would preserve your site there, and then we would, another possibility.
Continue the footnote. Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, another possibility is
is raised by ACUS recommendation 2012-2 midnight rules, which I haven't looked at it. which
maybe I can ask. This seems like something that we could ask our committee on style to characterize the prior ACUS recommendation here in the footnote in a way that would be informative and not terribly substantive. Does that seem acceptable?
Or you could take the language that's in the little blurb, which suggests that the look back period might start 90 days before January 20th.
I'm sorry, but which, the blurb, oh, I see the blurb over here, the comment.
The
Yeah,
margin.
no,
Yeah, sorry.
Now, the problem with that is that midnight rules really only apply in the last year of an administration. It's not every session.
So maybe, maybe it's another consideration is raised by, is raised in ACUS's recommendation 2012-2, which I don't have it's a little below my reading vision to see the comment there on the screen. But I think that this is something that we could, that the Committee on Style could, I think, if there's not an objection, I think we can come up with a characterization of the prior ACUS recommendation, which would accomplish what you're suggesting here, Jeff, which is the relevance of midnight rulemaking deadlines for this. Is that acceptable?
Yes, to me, yes.
Okay. I see Sally Katzen.
Thank
Sorry,
you. I just two factoids. One, I don't know how far back Jesse went, but in the 90s and the early aughts, it was more like May, June was when it started. And this may be a function of the, it may be a function of the increased partisanship that's happening. But the other thing is that during the negotiations on this bill, the people in Congress, particularly those Republicans, wanted the maximum amount of time. The negotiating position started with January of the year in which there was an election. But one of the reasons they justified the extended period of time was they thought that nobody in Congress would be paying any attention to something as silly as rules when they were up for re-election and had to worry about that, and then maybe clearing out their offices or welcoming their replacements or finding a better office in the building. They were very frank about the fact that no one pays attention to anything after the election. And therefore it had to, this is in response to Jeff's suggestion of 90 days, it had to be well before the August break. That was the rationale that produced this craziness.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Yeah, that's a helpful context here. I think that since it looks like the recommendations, the recommendation gives room to Congress. We backed off on exactly that. Hopefully, noting the midnight rule considerations, and then the report, Jesse, the time span of your report, maybe you could remind us of that.
Yeah, so I mean, in my own, I went back and looked at it over the full extent of the Congressional Review Act, saw exactly what Sally was flagging there. And then in terms of the report, it just sort of tentatively floated if you were looking to tie this to some sort of objective metric, precisely because of the the partisan balances you can get into that Sally was noting there, was trying to find just, okay, what's sort of a nonpartisan way to identify a date. Let's look at past practice, and the recommendation there, we pegged it to the last decade as opposed to more extended practice, specifically because, as I mentioned, the window varies for two reasons: the session, how much session days are spread out, as well as where the date of sine die adjournment falls, right? And the thought was, well, sine die adjournment used to move around more, and then you've got a period that seems to have stabilized current practice over the last decade or so. And if that is going to be the practice going forward, where then that gives us the best guess of kind of how to preserve the window that Congress is having in the present. So that was logic, and you can see here I think it's the sentence is phrased also just as information providing, not as even a recommendation in the preamble. So you can, but yeah, that's the context on kind of the report piece there.
Thanks. I see there's one, I don't know whether we're ready to move on from this. I see there's one other comment in the chat that I think we could handle quite easily. I'm also want to be conscientious of our time. So Elizabeth Cole raises that on line 19 of the preamble on the first page, we say that the preamble clearly says, the very last sentence of the page, for example, staffing disruptions related to COVID have in some instances meant that congressional officials had not been present in the Capitol to receive reports. And she notes that agencies also had difficulty with hand delivery. So maybe we could add, it meant that, you know, something along the agency officials meant that, and then it kind of come in the sentence there, agency officials had, or agencies had difficulty delivering. Are we, would reports work here by hand? Is that the right reference? And congressional officials, how does that work? I don't know, Elizabeth, did you have a different?
That works fine. I went back and forth between tattling on ourselves and wanting to recognize that it wasn't just Congress, right? I mean, we didn't have staff in the office. I mean, some people would go in or get FedEx envelopes at home. I mean, it was so anyway, but that looks good to me.
It looks like we're maybe time to kind of call the question here. So unless I hear objections to doing so, I think that we might try a vote by acclamation as to the, we could also do we have time to do a voice vote too, which with the committee members, but let's see if we can do a vote by acclamation, and the vote would be all those voting in favor of the recommendation as it is drafted here would say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, I actually should have checked whether votes by acclamation, we say, do we want to, I guess I might as well ask, are all those who are committee members who object to the recommendation say nay? Good. Well, let me first, I've got a bunch of thank yous here. First, I want to thank Jesse Cross for his really terrific and excellent report, and for his really helpful assistance to us in the committee here with us today. I also really want to thank Mark Thompson and Reeve Bull and Matt Weiner for their excellent work getting these recommendations and the preamble together. It was a long and thorough and detailed report, and something hard to condense clearly. So I really thank them so much. And I also want to thank all of you for participating today with your comments and suggestions, and remind you that that we'll have the plenary. I think that's December 16th. Is that right?
December 16th, yes.
December 16th. So looking forward to that. So maybe anything to kind of turn it back to you. So thank you so much. And let me turn it back to Matt to see if there's anything else, any other business or we should take care of at the present.
I don't think there's any other business. I just want to thank you, Kevin, for stepping in as our interim or acting chairman. You've acquitted yourself, if I may say so, extraordinarily well and gotten this done in 2 meetings, which itself is an accomplishment. And thank you very much. And thank you, Jesse, so much for what really is an outstanding report, and one that was written under time constraints that I'm not sure I would have been wanted to be under. And Mark Thompson as well, who I think drafted most of the preamble with us, maybe with some help from Jesse. And I thought it was really, really very well done, as evidenced by the relative absence of comments on the preamble. And the final thing I would say is I very much appreciate the suggestion from Sally and others that there are other issues under the CRA that ACUS might take up. And assuming the schedule permits for the plenary session, I at least would be supportive of opening that question up to the assembly a little bit and getting some discussion going as to whether ACUS should take on an additional recommendation project or study on the question of what is a rule and what's substantially similar and so forth and so on. That ultimately, the agenda, I should just a caveat here, the agenda is ultimately up to the council to approve, but I would support some provision on the agenda for at least a relatively brief discussion or initial discussion of that subject. That's all I have. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Kevin for any final words you have or to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you so much. I think that I move to adjourn the meeting. Good. So thanks, everyone. And hopefully hand waves count as seconds here. So I'll see you all. Look forward to seeing you at the plenary.